BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello from 2 farming conferences here in Oxford, where there were horns and harps and politics.
We want to make it easier for all farmers to meet the challenges of the transition and run successful businesses.
Oxford in early January is the venue for 2 major farming conferences. Now, you'll have to bear with me today because they may sound the same, but they are quite different. There's the Oxford Farming Conference and the Oxford Real Farming Conference. The first is seen as more traditional, attended by the established and larger farms, and the Real Farming Conference has a wider scope, with more smaller farms and organic producers, but both together represent UK farming as a whole. Now, much of the attention this year focused on demonstrating farmers and a convoy of tractors driven here along Oxford's High Street to lobby Defra Secretary Steve Reed in protest at government plans to change inheritance tax, and we'll hear from him a little later. Outside, the horns were deafening, but inside the marbled corridors of the examination schools, the conference continued. The theme for the OFC this year is Facing Change, Finding Opportunity. Jeff Sansom is the conference chair.
Well, the conference started in 1936, so next year we'll be our 80th conference, 90 years. We missed a few years in the wartime. So I think looking back and taking that long perspective about the changes that the industry has faced in those 90 years is a very valuable thing to do. The conference has grown and grown and grown. It was quite technical when it started, but at one time it had a reputation of being quite kind of establishment. But quite honestly, in the last decade, well, the last 30 years since I first attended, it's changed dramatically. It's very inclusive. It has a range of presentations. It's probably quite unique because it's not all technical, it's not all industry. We get some good international perspectives, we get some good out-of-industry perspectives, which help put our own challenges and opportunities into a great perspective.
Farming has been in the headlines. You know, there is a lot of anger out there at the moment, especially over inheritance tax, a lot of pressure on farmers because of changes in the budget. So how do you think the feel of this conference will be?
I think it will inevitably reflect the stresses and the immediate short-term pressures and indeed anger, which is, justifiable out there. And when we have our political session with the Secretary of State and the devolved ministers, I'm sure some of that will emerge. But that session in particular, I'm very keen to hear what the Secretary of State has to say around a new deal. And we need to give him time to not only address the conference but also to listen. To maybe get this relationship into a slightly better place than it is at the moment.
Change is a challenge for farmers, isn't it? But this conference is titled Opportunities as well as Change. So where are the opportunities in the changing farming system at the moment?
There will be opportunities. There's always opportunities around productivity. We'll have 2 fascinating presentations in terms of opportunities within the science, possibly some controversial discussions around opportunities with gene editing. And likewise, we'll have quite a few presentations from what we call our inspiring farmers, which are farmers who, despite many challenges, have made some great businesses in some quite different directions. So I think there'll be quite a few examples of where the opportunities are.
That's Jeff Sansom. I'm now walking down the road to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, which opened with that harp music you heard earlier. Hester van Hensbergen is the ORFC manager.
Well, so it's the 16th gathering of the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and we've got over 150 sessions across 19 venues, and we've got 2,000 people gathering in person, plus thousands joining us online. Certainly a lot of farmers are feeling really disaffected and isolated. And the amazing thing about the conference is that people get the chance to come together, meet like-minded people, re-energise for the year ahead, feel positive and excited about what they can do on their farms with or without the support of wider government and politics.
We have got a lot of concern from farmers about the impact that changes are having on them. They're being asked to do a lot for the environment, for food production. They're being charged increased national insurance payments for employees, and also with the payments from government falling away as well. How do you think they will feel about the future of farming just over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's a really challenging economic and political environment for farmers at the moment. What we're interested in focusing on is innovative farm technique that can help farmers transition to more environmental food and farming. And we're really interested in looking at things that don't cost a lot of money. Low-cost interventions is a really keen focus for us this year. So we're looking at things like agroforestry. We're also interested in the challenge of something like soya-based feeds for livestock. How do we transition away from importing masses of soya? So we're looking at homegrown proteins. So we're looking at the possibilities of legumes for livestock feeds, and we're looking at the possibilities of tree fodder as well in this conference. So lots of really practical take-home possibilities that are low cost for farmers and that people can really go home next week and apply on farm.
Well, that was Hester van Hensbergen, the ORFC manager. But what do the delegates here at the conference feel about how it's going?
This is my third in-person conference, and I've attended a couple of times online previously as well. And what I take away most from attending is a renewed sense of motivation and inspiration from all of the amazing people that are speaking here. And it really sets the scene for the rest of my year and keeps me going.
It's just a wonderful experience being able to be amongst so many other like-minded, beautiful individuals, all, gunning in the same direction. So really networking for me.
I'm speaking today, and we're talking about how to utilise microbes for different functions. Today we're talking about fixing atmospheric nitrogen using straw. It's an awesome opportunity to connect to the community, learn what everyone's up to, find out about different new techniques.
It's just a very inspiring place to come and see that we have the solutions, and at least enough people have the willpower to begin to make them happen.
Well, away from the hubbub of the delegates here at the ORFC, I went to speak to a farmer who's speaking to the conference here. It's Nick Renison. She farms 360 acres near Penrith in Cumbria with Aberdeen Angus cattle and pasture-based free-range laying hens. She's been telling farmers here about maximum sustainable output.
For me, it's farming at the sweet spot. So farming your land, ideally without feed and fertiliser if you're talking about cattle and sheep. And it's just farming it at what the land is capable of. So you're not pushing things to the limit. And then when you do that, you obviously have higher vet bills. Lots of problems come from pushing things to the limit.
But you're saying maximum sustainable output. So how do you get the maximum when you're not pushing things?
I think so we stopped using feed and fertiliser maybe 7 years ago. And it's a little bit like coming off drugs. It's you have to kind of go through the pain barrier. So we are now 7-8 years down the line and our soil is really working well. So it's using natural systems. They're kind of allowing natural systems to work at their maximum level.
The politicians have been talking about a plan for change. What sort of changes do you think farmers like you need to have?
We make it work. We're first generation farmers, so we probably think slightly differently. We think of we've got our land and we think of that as what can we do on that land, and we think of it in very much business terms. So it's looking after the soil and thinking we can produce food, we can get paid for doing good stuff for the environment, and at the same time we can give ourselves a good quality of life. With the inheritance tax situation, I think although there's going to be lots of downsides to that, there will be some upsides to it, and I think it will lead to lots of younger people making more decisions earlier.
Your session is being run at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. Many of the farmers here might come from slightly smaller operations maybe than the Oxford Farming Conference up the road. Do you think the mood here is optimistic about the future?
I think farmers are very good at being optimistic. I think there's lots of opportunities, but you've got to want to make it happen. But I think what's really important, and to get across to the government, is it's got to be financially viable. I think for a long time farmers have farmed for the love of it, and because they've always done it, and maybe because there's what else are they going to do. And I think we've really got to look at it as a business, and we've got to improve as business people.
Well, I've made my way now to the Victorian splendour of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, where the Oxford Real Farming Conference has put on a special session on the thorny issue of inheritance tax.
Guy Watson, Riverford Organics founder.
So it frustrates me that there are all these protests. What farmers should be protesting about is getting screwed by supermarkets, and that's what we should be calling for government action.
I'm with Guy Watson, who's been on the floor debating about the inheritance tax. You actually said that most farmers are very unhappy about the changes. What do you think about it yourself, though?
I wholeheartedly support the principle that the wealthy should be carrying more of the tax burden, and by wealthy I mean not just those who earn a lot of money, but those who own a lot of assets. So in principle, I guess I support the policy. In practice, I do know that this is going to be hugely difficult for a lot of family farms that I would love to see passed down the generations. So I guess I agree with the principle of the proposed changes, but the actual practice, I think they have made a mistake. And I think to raise an almost trivial amount of money and to cause, such a backlash in the countryside, I think they just must be kicking themselves for this, when they could have raised 10 times as much money from trying to capture some of the uplift in the value of land when it gets permission for development.
You say you agree with the principle, and on the surface of it, anyone outside farming would say, well, if I had that much money, I'd have to pay 40% inheritance tax, not 20%. So actually, the farmer's getting a good deal. What are they complaining about?
Well, I have spoken to quite a few people who do have that view, and though they initially are supportive of farmers, but then when they hear that they are getting this break anyway, and that these are people, with assets, but, these are fairly rich people, they're going to be in the top 10%, possibly the top 5% of this country, and for those who are struggling with far fewer assets, possibly with higher incomes, I'm not sure how long farmers are going to be able to sustain the public sympathy that they currently enjoy. Really, what we should be arguing about is farmers making a fair return for their work and their capital, which really means supermarkets paying more for milk and vegetables and pork and so on. And that's what we should be arguing about. And I think this has become a bit of a distraction for farmers and a bit of a distraction for the government, actually.
Well, what about the argument that some people say, well, the changes will force farmers to sell up? There are farmers saying, well, that's it. It's the end of our farm.
Much as I want to support farmers, the kind of emotive, less than completely true arguments used on both sides are driving me a bit nuts. You don't have to sell your farm. You may have to sell a quarter of the farm. That is difficult, but it's not the end of your business for most people, and someone else will buy that land and they may farm it in a different way, they may farm it in a better way. The idea that it's all going to get covered in solar panels and pony paddocks, those are planning issues, those things are going on anyway. They're a bit spurious, the argument, actually. We're arguing about the wrong things. We should be regulating supermarkets, and that's something that only the government can do.
That was Guy Watson. Well, having two farming conferences here in Oxford certainly means a lot of commuting for us journalists, walking up and down the frosty streets here. So we're now going back up the High Street, where the delegates settled in for a political session, and a visit from the Princess Royal, who is honorary president of the Oxford Farming Conference.
But you've also heard three speakers talking about the farming innovation in alternative technologies, like horsepower without diesel. I have Suffolk punches. I now have the harness. I even have a plough and a wagon, a tip wagon. I'm going backwards. You lot can go forwards. But it's It has certain advantages, particularly as the size of the trees that come down in my garden need to be moved.
Her Royal Highness Princess Anne. Well, it's the future that's on the minds of the delegates here, and farmers in the 4 nations of the UK will have to contend with different policies in their areas. Farming is a devolved issue, and each of the home nations is transitioning away from the previous EU payments in their own way. But all of them are working towards paying farmers not for the land they farm, but for providing better habitats for wildlife, flood mitigation, improving soils and carbon sequestration. Jim Fairley is Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity in Scotland.
Developing a new policy has been a collaboration, but government policymakers and farmers are not going to agree on everything. And realising our ambition for a sustainable sector and meeting our climate and nature obligations is going to be hard. But by working in partnership with the industry, we are doing it as harmoniously as we possibly can.
Hugh Aranka-Davies is Deputy First Minister and Rural Affairs Cabinet Secretary in Wales.
In November, I published the Sustainable Farming Scheme outline. It was clear that changes were needed. We said that we would listen, and that's exactly what we have done. And sustainable production of food has always been at the heart of SFS proposal. It remains so. And we must make meaningful progress as well on adapting and mitigating the climate and the nature emergencies.
Andrew Muir is Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland.
The resource and work required not just to navigate post-Brexit trading rules, but also to develop and implement new schemes is significant and onerous. I've always believed that Brexit was a bad idea. And in this job, I get to see the stark reality of that day after day. The overall objective is to transition to a more sustainable farming sector that benefit our climate and environment, whilst also supporting our economically and socially significant agri-food sector.
And we'll hear more from Andrew Muir in Northern Ireland and the ministers in charge of agriculture in Wales and Scotland in Farming Today next week. Well, delegates here were keen to hear from the Defra Secretary of State Steve Reed because, of course, he's been at the centre of the row over the implementation of inheritance tax for farmers, announced in the budget back in October. As he took to the stage here, farmers outside drove a convoy of tractors right up to the exam schools. Here on the High Street, we're surrounded by tractors which have come to protest about the government's implementation of inheritance tax on farmers. I can see them here with their Union Jacks on the cabs. No farmers, no food, axe the tax. So coming past these tractors lined up in the High Street and coming into this building here in the examination schools, did the Secretary of State Steve Reed actually address the question of inheritance tax when he stood up in front of the delegates here? It certainly wasn't the focus of his speech. Instead, he promised a plan for change, centred on 3 things: food production, diversification of income and restoration of nature as part of farming. He also announced speeding up the planning process for farm buildings.
We want to make it easier for all farmers to meet the challenges of the transition and run successful businesses. But what I'm hearing from so many is that the turmoil of recent years has made farming incredibly tough. The straws are piling up. It's no wonder people feel the camel's back is close to breaking.
We caught up with delegates to find out what they thought of his speech.
There wasn't anything that I heard that drastically changed my opinion or the general outcome of the sector. I think the positive aspects taken from that was the relaxation in planning laws, which will make it easier for farmers to diversify. There's never going to be any budging on the inheritance tax side. He was not coming to a friendly crowd, so no surprises, no shifting there.
Informative and inspiring to hear what was being said today.
I think it's interesting to hear the plan for the development of agriculture. Unfortunately, it is all rather clouded in the uncertainty around budget announcements. I think it is going to be an anchor on the innovations that people are keen to get ahead with.
They've talked about the things that they plan to do, and only time will tell as to whether they'll make a difference in that regard.
It's all very positive stuff, but it's medium to long term, and the effects of the recent changes, that's a short-term problem, and our businesses need to survive that short-term problem to be able to profit from the good work that they plan to put in place in the future. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to get over that hump.
Afterwards, I asked the Secretary of State to tell me more about his plan for change.
Farmers are facing a huge transition because of, the increased uncertainty globally from geopolitical events like we've seen in Ukraine, pushing up energy prices, climate change, the more extreme weather that we're facing. And farmers know there needs to be a transition. We've talked about it for years, but the government has never been clear about where we're heading or really how we're going to get there. So today, I was outlining the destination we want to get to, which is financially and environmentally viable businesses that can thrive into the future and turn a profit for the huge amount of money that farmers put in. Food production always at the heart of what we do, but supporting farm businesses to diversify so they have other income streams that can protect them when we get difficulties of the kind that I just outlined.
You said that you've been speaking to farmers, and this phrase, the last straw breaking the camel's back, came up a lot. I think farmers feel that your plan for change is fine, and they've heard quite a lot of it before, but actually you need to do something now. They need action now.
We did things now, so we've put £60 million in the bank accounts of farmers who were hit by the flooding last year. We did that just over recent weeks, got it out the door. Hopefully it's helping people right now. In the budget, we also announced a £5 billion budget for sustainable food production and nature, and that's the biggest budget of its kind in our country's history. And we did that.
That's over 2 years.
Over 2 years, absolutely.
And that is basically the same as 2.4 billion.
No, in cash terms it's bigger. It's still bigger.
But you're adding in the underspend.
But you've got to look at the context.
And with inflation, it's not increasing at the rate that inflation is.
If you look at the context of a £22 billion black hole that had to be filled, protecting any budget was incredibly tough in that context. And we not only protected this budget in cash terms, we increased it because food production and supporting our farmers through this difficult period, we understand the importance of doing that. Now, I don't want us to be in a situation where year after year, we're just dealing with the crisis in a different way. That we've gone on too long like that. We've got to have a roadmap that takes farming to a different place, that makes it sustainable financially, not just environmentally, for the future. It makes me angry when I go around farms and I speak to farmers and I feel their enthusiasm for what they do, but also their desperation that they can't make any money out of this. It's not acceptable that we should go on like that. So the roadmap, which will have farmers in the lead, not politicians like me, farmers in the lead, working out how we together, government backing them, farmers in the lead, get to that position where farming is a thriving, financially successful set of businesses backed by the government domestically and in international trade deals.
But as a farmer sits at his kitchen table, works out, or her, then obviously they're working with what the figures are in front of them.
Yes.
The payments to them are being phased out quicker than before. They're facing inheritance tax. They're looking at nature and they're saying they agree with you. They want to save nature. The Wildlife Trusts told us this week that there needs to be a clear future for nature-friendly farming schemes as a matter of extreme urgency.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Professor Dieter Helm told us that he thought Defra is not fit for purpose to deliver the transition. And I think farmers, many farmers we've talked to, feel the same.
Well, I'm not going to start fiddling with organisational architecture because that's going to be a huge distraction from getting on with the job and helping farmers. The way I'm dealing with that is by putting farmers in the lead. My experience as a politician in different contexts has always been the politicians aren't the people on the front line. In this case, it's the farmers who are. Listen to the front line because they know best what the problems are and how to overcome those problems.
So
we've got the power, we've got the resources.
When they're hooting their tractors' horns outside here in a protest about inheritance tax?
I know
this
is a tough one, but one of the things that has made life difficult for farming and every other business sector in the economy has been the chronic instability over the last decade plus. People have not invested because of that instability. We've seen prices rocketing, businesses failing, customers falling off because of instability.
Absolutely.
We have to stabilise the economy, and that's required tough decisions. I regret we've had to take tough decisions because I know that it makes life difficult for some people in the short term. But in the long term, it will give us the stability that will bring in the investment and the security so we can make this sector succeed.
The Environment Secretary Steve Reed. That's all for today from Oxford. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.